So we found out last week that Eric Berry is going to be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. One of his teammates joins the show and is going to tell us some great stories about who Eric Berry was then and, of course, who he is now. That's coming up now on a Friday, Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, welcome into it, your Friday edition of Locked On Vols. Appreciate you guys for being here today and hanging out with me while I'm on vacation. A quick reminder, if you're listening to this show for the first time this week, I am on vacation, though this is a pre-recorded show. Want to get that out there in the open. We'll be back 5 days a week next week, but I appreciate you guys for hanging out and sticking with us. Making Locked On Vols your first listen each and every day. Got a fun show planned here today. Going to talk with Robert Boswell. He is a former UT football player. He is the host of the Walked On Perspective. If you want to check out that podcast, I'm sure you guys have as well. He's been a friend of the podcast. He's come on a couple of times, so excited to get Robert on here to talk a little Eric Berry. And then in segment 3, Jimmy Hyams, longtime Knoxville sports reporter and radio host, announced his retirement from the field last week. He's coming on to talk about his experiences and his career. That is coming up here in segment number 3. But without further ado, let's bring him on, the man, the myth, the legend, Robert Boswell. What's up, brother?
What's going on, Kane? I appreciate you having me on. It's been too long, and a lot has gone down since we had the privilege of speaking last. I think some congratulations are in order for you both professionally as well as personally. First and foremost, we'll address professionally the move to On3. I know that you'll continue to dominate in everything that you've been doing, especially with the guys over there with Brent and Austin. Y'all do tremendous work, and I can't wait to see what's next for y'all professionally. And then personally, I want to welcome you into the exclusive fraternity that is being a husband. I see that you have been successful in outkicking your coverage. So congratulations, my friend.
Dude, no doubt. I 100% outkick my coverage. I am blessed. I have her fooled, but hey, we got the rings on the fingers now, so it's too late to turn back, right? So I'm super excited, and thank you for that. And it's been a blessing being over here at On3, man. Been with Brent and the guys, and Austin Price, Rob Lewis, and been with them for a couple of years now, and making the move over to On3, the vision, the dynamic of the company, the resources, adding a couple new teammates. It has been a hell of a ride so far, and we're just getting started, so I appreciate that. I want to bring you on, and of course, you are the host of the Walk-On Perspective. I said that kind of in the intro. Former UT walk-on football player, played the 09 seasons, and we talked about your journey just a little bit, but it's so unique, and anybody watching and listening right now, check out that podcast, the Walk-On Perspective. You do an awesome job highlighting some of the great walk-on success stories around college football, and of course, right here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we can get into a little bit more of that later, but you were teammates with a guy that's going to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, Eric Berry. So, how was that experience being teammates with Eric Berry, just going to work every day and seeing a guy that you knew was going to be just great one day, obviously in college, but in the NFL and in the game of life?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you for that more than generous introduction. I think you're building me up to be much more than I was. But as far as addressing having been a teammate with the greatest of all time, Eric Berry, you're absolutely right. I was fortunate enough in my junior year, I was a member of Coach Fulmer's program as an assistant, just a volunteer assistant position on the offensive side. And I got to be around the team. I got to see the dynamics. And as a student, Eric was a year younger than me, but he had been on campus. That was his second year, his sophomore season, when he made first team All-American. And out off the field, if you didn't know him, I mean, he was kind of this larger than life figure, especially on campus at the time. If you were a student, he was almost at celebrity status because of his recruitment and then just the media attention that followed him. We didn't enjoy a lot of success that season. In fact, that was Coach Fulmer's undoing that year. And then with the transition, Coach Kiffin and Orgeron and their entire staff came in, and I did leverage that opportunity, having been around the team, and I looked at it as my chance to scratch that itch. I had missed football, and I realized that I had been a part of the program. I saw some of the other walk-ons, and I said, "Hey, I could probably do this. I'm just as good as these guys." So yeah, I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity and became a teammate of Eric's, and getting to know him. I don't want to paint the wrong picture. It's not like we were buddy, but I was his teammate, and I got to see how he interacted with his teammates when it was in a practice setting, during morning lift sessions, when the media availability was over, and just the true person he really was. And you used the word greatness. He embodied that on and off the field in every way that you could possibly imagine. For those who have a tough time remembering, that was a incredibly athletic defensive backfield at the time that we had, obviously led by Eric Berry, but we had Dennis Rogan, Brett Vinson, Prentice Wagner. We had Art Evans, who played pretty meaningful snaps that year. Jansen Jackson may have been the most athletic of all of them. I mean, had he just kept his head on straight, I mean, he could have been all world. So it was an incredibly athletic backfield. Eric Berry was the best of all of them, and it wasn't close. So for somebody to stand out the way that he did in and around the incredible talent in the backfield that we had at the time just goes to show the different type of athlete that you were dealing with. So many times throughout my playing career, both in high school and in college, when you were around guys who were that elite, they seemed to carry a certain, maybe you call it cockiness about them, but not with EB. He could not have been more generous with his time with both media and with his teammates off the field. I remember the first time that I really got to see him as a human, and where that kind of larger than life stigma that he had kind of went away from me. For people who don't realize it, you don't work out as far as morning lifts as an entire team. There's just not enough space. We had about 110 total people, so they broke them up into about 4 different groups with different positions and whatnot. And I was fortunate enough, my morning lift session at 7 a.m. was the one that Eric was in. And I remember this was during the season, and for people who don't realize, when you're getting ready for a game and then that game is assigned to a specific network, for instance, the game that I'm referencing in the story, ESPN had our assignment, and the sideline reporter for our upcoming game was Erin Andrews. Well, Erin Andrews, the week leading up to the game, was doing her job. She was meeting with the players, trying to get some game notes for the broadcast. And she met after practice with Eric. And I remember him telling us about this, his rehashing of this interview with Erin Andrews the next morning when we were at lifts. And it's really when I got to see Eric as a human and that comedic side to him. But I remember him saying, man, we were in the middle of this interview, and Erin Andrews, she's just kind of staring at me all funny. And I stop and I'm like, you good? And she stopped and she was staring into my eyes. She said, I just can't stop staring into your eyes. They're absolutely gorgeous. And he was like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, thank you. And I forget who it was, but one of the guys who was in our morning lift session that morning, in response to that story, it made the whole group crack up laughing. They were like, oh man, I knew she was like that. I seen the video. And for those who don't know what I'm referencing, if you know, you know. That's all I'm gonna. That's how I'm gonna leave it there. So that was really the first Eric Berry moment where I got to see the more human side of him. The way that he was looked at in the locker room by his peers, he didn't have to be a vocal leader. In fact, he wasn't. On that team that year, I'd say the vocal leader on that team was a guy who's probably doing a lot of the similar things right now, the team chaplain, Chris Walker. He was probably our vocal team leader. He, Rico McCoy, but a bunch of defensive guys. The offensive guys were more quiet leaders, guys like Jonathan Crompton, Denarius Moore, Gerald Jones. You had Chris Scott on the offensive line, who played several years in the National Football League, Luke Stalker, guys who went on to have a lot of NFL talent on that team. But as far as vocal leaders, Eric Berry wasn't really a vocal leader. He led by example. And one of the the first realizations that I had in practice, realizing what kind of a leader he was and the way that his teammates looked up to him. It was a guy who I walked on with. His name was Armstead, and it was scout team defense. Excuse me, it was scout team offense going up against first team defense. And during game week preparation, you don't, other than when you go good on good, you're not really going 100%. But in this instance, EB starts to come up, and we're just going through the motions. And Armstead puts truck stick, old school PlayStation truck stick, and levels EB. And you kind of heard this gasp with this ooh across the field for guys who were kind of half paying attention because they realized who that was that just got truck sticked. And then it was like, okay, it's on now. And the entire team, you could feel the tension on the field. You could cut it with a knife. And the very next play, the entire defense looks over at EB and they're like, hey, man, I got you. Next play, they give the ball back to Armstead. Herman Lathers, who is probably the most talented guy that doesn't get the recognition that he gets for being an absolute monster, he crushed Armstead. I mean, absolute collapsed under pressure. I think that there was a divot in the ground where he put him. And Herman looks over at EB and it's like, hey, man, I got you. That's just the way that his teammates looked out for him. You knew that he was a leader. And he led in so many different ways during my time around him and just getting to observe his greatness. I had mentioned previously where we all got to work out together because I was fortunate enough to be in his lifting group. And I don't want to paint the wrong picture. There weren't some of the real monster strong guys along the offensive and defensive line that were in our particular lift group, but we did have linebackers and tight ends and a lot of strong guys. We did have linemen as well, just not some of the really powerful guys, but it just goes to show the type of competitor he is and his greatness. We had a lift session that after the entire thing was over with, we had a bench press competition. Put 225 on the barbell, which is what they use at the NFL Combine, and we were just going for reps. Eric Berry, all 195 pounds of him at 5'11" and a half at defensive back, had the most bench press reps of anybody in our entire lift group. And that includes guys much bigger than him. And that's just, people see the feats of greatness on the field on Saturdays, but those are the kind of things that behind the scenes people just don't get to see. He truly was the greatest, both on and off the field, in the way that he carried himself, the way that he prepared, the way that he dealt with human beings, whether it be his teammates, fans, media. I mean, he truly was the greatest athlete I've ever had the privilege to play alongside, and I'm very fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Yeah, College Football Hall of Fame inductee coming up for Eric Berry, and of course he went on and was drafted 5th overall, I believe, 5th overall by the
fifth overall to Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, and had such a great NFL career, and again, my favorite thing about Eric Berry is just the way he battled adversity. I mean, dude got cancer, came back, NFL Comeback Player of the Year, tore his Achilles, came back, made a couple more Pro Bowls. I mean, the guy it doesn't have quit in him, and I've heard a lot of stories about him over the last couple of days, and one that might be my favorite. Brent Hubbs told us on the Rocky Top Rewind a couple, I guess it was last Sunday, and just about how he would go in and walk, from before the Anderson training facility or whatever, before they added on or something, before my time, obviously, and he was walking from the practice field down to where he was parked or whatever, and he passed by some of the equipment managers and guys like that, and he had a repertoire with them, and he was walking through, and he just saw Eric Berry sitting over there and buffing helmets and putting on stickers and everything, and he's like, what do you do? And he's like, I like these guys. I hang out with them. We get pizza every week. Like, I mean, that right there is unheard of for a star football player, not just on Tennessee's team, but in the country. I mean, again, a top 5 draft pick. So that right there is a really, really good story. And of course, congratulations still in order for Eric Berry on his induction into the College Football Hall of Fame. Robert's got more, man. Like I said, he does the walk-on perspective, a former walk-on UT football player. And there's a couple of great walk-on players around the country, but also right here in Knoxville, Tennessee, who've had big moments and who could have big moments this spring and for the 2023 season. We'll catch up with Robert here on the other side. But first, BetOnline, your number one source for all your sports betting information, news, stats, and analysis. Get all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football, of course, the playoffs going on right now, to college football season. Bowl season wrapped up with the national championship last week. You have basketball, college basketball. Tennessee's an SEC swing right now. World Cup a couple months ago. They've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts as well, like the one you're listening to right now, they got them over there at BetOnline. But as always, listen to Locked On Vols first. Always the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your sports betting information, from spreads to totals, from first half props, whatever you guys want, you can find it at BetOnline. You can head on over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn about all the latest trends and all the action. BetOnline, it is where the game starts. All right, guys, welcome back into your Friday show. This is Locked On Vols, your team every single day, and I'm your host, Eric Kane. You can always follow me on Twitter at _Kaner. Appreciate you guys hanging out today. Having a good time catching up with Robert Boswell, former UT football player for the 09 season, teammates of Eric Berry, and really enjoyed your memories and some of those stories there from segment number one. But also, you host the Walk-On Perspective, being a former walk-on player yourself, and you highlight some of those success stories throughout all of college football. And there were a couple of really good success stories for Tennessee if you look back to the 2022 season. Of course, we know about Big Dane Davis, and man, he's on scholarship now, but of course he started as a walk-on. He's played some big-time snaps for Tennessee. My favorite moment is obviously going to be William Wright, right? I mean, you got a walk-on cornerback that's on the field for the final drive of Alabama in that Alabama football game, and they recognize it, they go right after it, and they throw a slant, he makes a tackle. If you miss that tackle, it's a touchdown, game over. But a walk-on cornerback on the field in that moment, of course Tennessee was devastated by injuries at that point. I mean, what a moment for William Wright, and I'm sure, I think you had a chance to catch up with him. If not, hopefully you do. I mean, what a moment there for a Tennessee walk-on.
Thanks, Eric. Haven't been able to make that happen just yet, although I look forward to doing that hopefully soon.
No.
You highlighted what, in my opinion, is definitely up for consideration for the winning play in the Alabama game. So many people, when remembering that game, are going to remember the kick to win it. They're going to remember Brew McCoy's massive catch to set up the game-winning kick. They're going to remember Jalen Hyatt's incredible 5-touchdown reception performance. But few people are going to remember the William Wright play. As you mentioned, a Middle Tennessee native, played locally at Emsworth, was actually teammates with Andre Turrentine, who was on scholarship up there, as well as Wesley Walker, transfer from Georgia Tech. So a guy that played at high school at an incredibly high level and is looked at as an equal amongst his peers from having been a prior teammate of them, and prepares as if he's a starter, even though he is a walk-on. And he may be on scholarship now at this point. If not, I would definitely look for that to occur probably this offseason. But you mentioned it thrust into action just due to injuries, and it made you could argue, game-winning tackle to win for the first time in 15 years against Nick Saban in Alabama. I mean, that's just one of many massive walk-on success stories there at the University of Tennessee from this past season. At walk-on perspective, we have the privilege of talking to walk-on success stories, both male and female, in their respective sports all across the country. But there are few schools that had as many to highlight as did the University of Tennessee, my alma mater. You had people will forget because of the nature of the way that the game played out, but on the road against a really tough LSU team who went on to represent the West in the SEC championship.
First play of the game.
First play of the game, you had walk-on Will Brooks, who recovered the fumble, the muffed kick. And that's really what set up the game to play out the way it did. Tennessee seized momentum and never let off the gas. And you could play the butterfly effect. If that doesn't happen, if that play isn't made by walk-on Will Brooks, that game could have very well gone a different direction. So between, you mentioned it, Big Dane Davis, who is a walk-on perspective alum, along with the great Grant Firking, So many great walk-on successes from the University of Tennessee. As far as looking ahead, what I'm excited for in spring ball particularly is to see who, if anybody, amongst the running backs are going to emerge at the walk-on position, because you're going to have guys like a Jabari Small and a Jalen Wright who are not going to be spring ball participants due to needing off-season surgeries and having things cleaned up. So it's going to be a heavy sample size of Dylan Sampson. And remember, Khalifa Keefe, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, I don't think he's an early enrollee.
He's
so
not.
for guys who are, banking on him, he's not going to be there. So you're going to have to have a walk-on who's going to step up. And, I hope that one emerges that we get to highlight going into fall that might actually, in maybe mop-up duty, get some carries. As far as projecting out for this next year, if I was to highlight somebody who truly has a chance to play meaningful snaps other than the guys who we've already highlighted, look for Gaston Moore. You got to see him in just truly mop-up duty against some of the lower-level competition late in games this season. But the quarterback room is going to be a lot smaller this coming year with Hendon Hooker out of eligibility. And it'll be interesting to see what Taven Jackson chooses to do depending upon how spring ball plays out. If he doesn't like the way that he is slotted, if Nico Iamaleava proves to be what he is touted to be, Taven Jackson, if he transfers out of there, you're all of a sudden left with 2 scholarship quarterbacks. And then the only other person who has more than 1 year in Josh Heupel's offense is going to be walk-on Gaston Moore, who, if you'll remember, was the backup quarterback in the Orange Bowl against Clemson. Had something happened to Joe Milton, we would have gotten a heaping helping of Gaston Moore. So a guy who I expect we will probably see some meaningful snaps out of this coming season. A guy who I'll be excited to see in spring ball as well.
Gaston Moore has got a cannon on him too. And if even further research, he was at UCF when Josh Heupel was at UCF. He comes with, he sits down a little bit, and he came in and in a mop-up duty, did some things this past year. But you're right. I mean, he was the entire bowl season prep. I mean, he was a backup quarterback, and going into the Orange Bowl against Clemson, if a helmet popped off, if Milton sprained an ankle, whatever, it was going to be Gaston Moore. And he looks the part too. I mean, a lot of these walk-ons, they look. It's not just the typical Rudy story or whatever when they're smaller, they're slower or whatever. I mean, some are, but Gaston Moore is a big guy, and again, he's got the arm strength that can rival. Maybe not Joe Milton, but no one else can. But he's got the arm strength that can rival a ton of people and a ton of other quarterbacks. So I'm with you there. I guess the last thing I want to mention on the walk-on front is just I remember this past spring practice, and Tennessee's, much like the 2022 season, Tennessee's secondary was just devastated by injuries. There was no cornerbacks. Christian Charles started to make the switch over, but he got hurt during spring. Danico Slaughter switched over a little bit. He got hurt during spring. There was no Warren Burrell. There was no Kamal Haddon. There was no Brandon Turnage. Tennessee had no cornerbacks. And Tennessee, I believe, Trayvon Flowers, the safeties might have been there, but there was no star player either. So Tamarion McDonald, who's not a walk-on, but had seen no experience whatsoever in the defensive backfield, he got every rep at star. Wesley Walker wasn't here yet. And I think that really helped him earn that job in fall camp. And then William Wright, we go out there for the pseudo orange and white game on the practice field that was really nothing. And you look over there, I'm like, who's 36? Who is that guy? And I look at my roster, I'm like, oh, William Wright. Okay. William Wright got every rep as a first-team corner that spring. And again, it proved to be worthy, playing the biggest snaps arguably of the season there at the end of the Alabama game. I feel like, you work out with the team, you for the most part, you travel with the team, you are a part of the team. You never know when your number might get called. And I think some of these guys, Dane Davis included, are just always preparing as if they are the guy to showcase their abilities when they get that chance.
It's getting to where the walk-on success stories are not as rare across the country with the emergence of name, image, and likeness legislation having gone through, because you'll see guys, particularly at the Power 5 levels, you'll see guys who are quote unquote walk-ons who would have definitely been scholarship guys at the group of 5 level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what NIL has done. It has made the separation between the good teams and the okay teams even further, just because of that NIL opportunity. So you've got legit players who have legit talent who could be starters at, say, like I mentioned, a group of 5 level, and they're taking walk-on opportunities because the money is equivalent with name, image, and likeness opportunities. You're going to see so many more instances across college football, not just at Tennessee, with walk-ons being meaningful players on their respective teams, guys who are counted on. We just saw this week, at the time of this recording, a former walk-on quarterback lead his team to back-to-back national championships and an undefeated season. I hate to have to reference a Georgia quarterback, Stetson Bennett, on Locked On Vols podcast, but it's true. It's becoming less and less of a unicorn type situation where walk-on guys, they're dudes. In the recruiting process, you know it well because you do it professionally. It's not perfect. Guys get lost in the weeds so often, and you can't take everybody. And there's so many people who just develop later in life, guys who just may not have their heads on straight or need to clean some things up academically. And for whatever reason, maybe it's an injury that prevented them from getting a scholarship opportunity. And then once they fully recover, you name it, there's so many examples for why a walk-on can ultimately go on to become not only a starter, but a scholarship player and a star on their respective team. And I really love being able to highlight those stories. It keeps me inspired to do what I'm doing. I love being able to share a platform where people can go and listen to these stories, find out who's behind the helmet, and learn about their journey. And it gives people a greater appreciation for what they're seeing on the field on Saturdays, knowing all the hard work and all of the things that had to happen to get that young man or woman to where they are today.
So where can we consume more of your product? How often do you do it? I know it's probably weekly, I believe, but where can we find it, and who can we look forward to maybe hearing from in the next coming weeks to months?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. You can find Walk On Perspective on just about any listening platform. We're on Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube. I'd appreciate YouTube follow from anybody out there with the Locked On Vols listener
Do
audience.
it, guys. Do it. It means the world to us. Please.
Yeah, so you can find us on just about any listening platform that you're currently subscribed or listening on. We're on all the social media platforms. We're at WO Perspective on Twitter. We're Walk On Perspective on Facebook and Instagram. We're pretty easy to find. If you want to go old school and go website, it's just walkonperspective.com.
Awesome, man. Robert, I appreciate it. Great stuff. Appreciate your time here today, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you have coming up next.
No doubt, brother. Go Big Orange.
All right, we got Jimmy Hyams coming up next here on Locked On Vols. What a career. He's going to discuss his reasonings for retiring and what's going on next for him. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Vols. All right, guys, welcome back into a Friday edition of Locked On Vols. Appreciate you guys being here and being here all week while I've been out of town. Can't thank you enough. Wanted to end this week with, really a special interview I wanted to bring to the show. And this guy's been doing sports media in Knoxville since, I think, 1984. He can correct me in just one moment. He's been covering sports longer than that. He's broke countless news stories and sports stories. Probably in the hundreds. He's done radio in Knoxville, Tennessee since 1998. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a great man. He's good at his craft. He's good in the community. He's a lover of tennis and golf and pickleball. His name is Jimmy Hyams, and Jimmy announced his retirement effective March the 31st. This was an announcement made last week. Jimmy, congratulations. Thank you for joining us. And, what's been the reception like the last couple of days since you've made your announcement?
Gosh, Eric, I've been overwhelmed. I've heard from some people that I hadn't heard from in years. And I guess I've been touched by the fact that several people told me that I touched them in their career journey in the media, which I didn't expect. But it was kind of a pleasant surprise. But I've been very humble by the response as well. But I've done this a long time. I started very young. I actually got involved with it when I was a teenager and was a sports editor for the newspaper when I was 16 years old. And, I've got over 50 years. So I just feel like it's time. And I want to do it while I'm still healthy enough to do the things you just mentioned: golf, tennis, pickleball, fish, hiking, traveling. So I want to be able to do all those things. And by the way, that's just on Monday. I can't wait to do it in the store on a Tuesday.
Jimmy, I read in your blog that you put up at 99.1 The Sports Animal when you made your announcement that you turned in your first news story at the age of 12. Is that correct? Do you remember that story? And I mean, why so young? I mean, I wrote my first story when I was probably like 22. I mean, you were 12.
Well, part of what happened, and it's not really the way you should do things, but I was 12 years old, and I played on a CYO basketball team at St. Mary's, which was in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And so we won the CYO championship, and we played down in Alexandria, which is 55 miles from Natchitoches. And the sports editor to the newspaper had heard about it and asked me to write a story about the game in which I played. I probably shouldn't have, but I said, well, okay. So anyway, I wrote a story about it, and he published it in the Natchitoches Times. And the very next year, he asked me to go cover high school football and high school basketball games. And so I said, sure. So I loved sports, and so I got hooked on it. And then a few years later, after the sports editor resigned, they called me in and asked me to be the sports editor when I was 16. And I told them I'm too young for this. They said, no, we trust in you. So that's what got me started. But yeah, I was 12 years old when I wrote about a CYO championship in basketball at St. Mary's in Natchitoches, Louisiana.
Ooh, that is quite the story. And ultimately you went on and you did that, and you went to school and all that, and then you started your professional career, and you came to Knoxville again. Was I right? It was 1984, correct?
85.
1985, and you've been here ever since, working for the Knoxville News Sentinel, and of course, Cumulus and Citadel and doing the radio side of things. What brought you to Knoxville? Was it the Knoxville News Sentinel?
Yes. It was kind of a story that sometimes I don't like to relive, but my dream job was to cover LSU football and basketball. And I was 25 when I got that beat, and then was told at some point that the newspaper was a community newspaper and everything that you wrote about LSU had to be positive. And I just don't view it that way. I mean, if LSU gets in trouble, if they had an NCAA investigation going on, if they had players kicked off the team, you got to write about it. And that's not the way they viewed it. And so we just had some philosophical differences that led me to Knoxville in 1985. And I've not had anybody in Knoxville tell me what I have to write and what I have to say. And that's kind of the way I preferred it. So that's what led me to Knoxville. But Eric, it's the best professional move I've ever made. It's the best personal move I've ever made. I love Knoxville, loved it from the time I got here. Had no idea I would be in Knoxville that long. I'll tell you a quick story, and I recounted this the other day because I was visiting with Phil Williams, and on this particular day, excuse me, it was in January, and he said, do you realize that back in 1985, we had the coldest day in the history of Knoxville? It was minus 24 degrees. Ooh. I said, yeah, I was in Knoxville then. I was covering a LSU Tennessee basketball game, and it was minus 24, 9 inches of snow. And I proclaimed right then, there's no way in hell I'm ever moving to Knoxville. 6 months later, I was living in Knoxville.
That's usually how those things work, right? so you should never say those things. You're a writer. You're an investigative reporter. You've done that. That is still who you are. You did that for so long, but since 1998. You have put on a headset. You've done radio and sports talk here in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the Sports Animal. And Sports Talk is just a legendary sports talk show in the state of Tennessee. And I mean, you go really around the country. People know who you and John are, and Mike Keith, and Brent Hubbs, and everybody who's been involved with that show. How was that transition for you in your career, and how have you liked radio the last 24 years?
Well, it was a challenge. I mean, Eric, I was 42, and I'm making a significant career change, going from newspaper, which was my entire background. Now, look, I did a little bit of radio in Louisiana. I did some play-by-play for high school basketball, high school football. I did some color analyst for high school football. color analyst for college football a little bit, but I didn't know, I had no radio background other than just being on the air. And so that was a big move for me. And I talked with Mike Keith a lot about it. And certainly John Wilkerson was fantastic in helping with the transition. But I was a little bit of a fish out of water when I started, because I didn't know the inner workings. And I did tell Mike Hammond and Bobby Dent when they hired me, I said, look, you're not hiring a supporter, you're hiring a reporter, if that's what you want. And that's what I am. And but I said, I'll report, I'll interview people, I'll put together the best shows I can on a daily basis, and try to break as many stories as we can. And they said, no, that's what we want. And the offshoot of that, and I really, this was, look, I'm not going to lie about this. One reason I made the move was they were paying me more money. But the other thing was I thought I could have a greater impact on the community. And I've tried to be invested in the community. I've worked with 5 different charities at different times to try to help raise money for them. My mother always told me that whatever community you live in, you need to try to make it a better place to live. And so I've tried to do that. When you're at radio, you become more of a public figure. You're on the air for 4 hours a day, at least I was, or am. And so you interact more with the public. And if you're at a newspaper, you're a little bit more of a faceless person, and you're writing articles that show up in the paper, but you're not as engaged with the public or with the community. And I thought in radio, I'd have a better opportunity to do that, and that actually proved to be true.
Well, Jimmy, I'm going to end on this. I want to ask you one more question, but I do mean, what I saw your announcement. I tweeted at you the other day. Your work ethic is second to none. That's something I've admired by you. Working with you for 5 years, and your sense of humor is fantastic. I love it. You have certainly, you made an impact on me. So I just want to let you know that. And I've always admired your work, and will continue to admire your freelance work as you go on in this next chapter. But this is maybe an unfair question because you've covered so much. You had so many of these moments. But is there one moment in your career, one sporting event in your career, or something that just kind of really, really sticks out compared to all the other Final Fours or Super Bowls or everything else that you've covered?
That is hard to narrow it down, but I will tell you, one of the greatest experience I had covering a game was actually the first year I was in Tennessee in 1985. That was the Sugar Vols. Mm-hmm. Tennessee hadn't won a SEC championship in 16 years, and they win the SEC. They go to New Orleans. I'm going back to my home state. I'm covering the Sugar Bowl. And oh, by the way, there were about 50,000 plus Tennessee fans in the Superdome. To cover that game and to see all the Tennessee fans there and to watch them destroy Miami, I'm thinking, man, I'm living the dream here to cover an event like that. That stands out. The national championship that Tennessee won in football in 1998 season in Arizona, that stands out as well. That was a big moment. But one of the things that I've enjoyed, there have been a lot of events that I've been fortunate enough to cover, and I've been to 32 different states covering events. But one of the things I've appreciated was developing relationships with the coaches, relationships with the student athletes or the athletes that I've covered, the relationships that I built with people in the media. That's what's been important to me. I had somebody talking about how, what was it like going down to Miami, and maybe they didn't like Miami when Tennessee went to the Orange Bowl. It's not my kind of city, and I get that. But you know what? I met some pretty neat people in Miami. I met some neat people in the media hospitality room where I probably hung out a little bit too much. But that's what it's about to me. It's meeting people. It's engaging in people. It's in addition to doing your work. So that's what I've enjoyed as much as anything in regard to covering events. It's building the relationships with a variety of folks along the way.
Well, Jimmy, man, what a career. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us a little bit about it. You're going to be on the air until March the 31st, correct? Right.
I started to do it April 1st, but I thought people might think this is a joke.
Yeah.
So I decided I better do March 31 so people don't be too cynical about this.
Yeah, smart move for sure. Going a day earlier. March 31st. We'll be looking forward to hearing you the next couple of months. And seriously, Jimmy, thank you so much. What a career, the Standard, and you've done a great job, and we'll continue to do a good job in your freelance work, and I look forward to reading that and hearing you doing some other stuff. So, Jimmy, congratulations again, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's nice of you to ask. And by the way, with all the hats that you've worn through the years, you're off to a great start in this career as well. So congratulations to you.
Appreciate that, Jimmy. Thank you so much, man. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Jimmy Hyams, man, man of the people, one of my favorite people, and I mean that. He is his work ethic truly is. I mean, I don't know if I've seen anybody work harder than Jimmy Hyams over the years. I had a front row seat. Didn't work on his show, but have been in the same work family, and I've interacted with him. I've done a practice report with him for the last 4 years and talked to him every single day during football season at 6:15. Front row seat, to a true pro, and I mean that in every sense of the word. So, thank you so much to Jimmy. Congratulations to Jimmy Hyams, one of the best in this area to ever do it, truly. And he is going to have a great time going and hiking and fishing and playing pickleball and doing all that stuff. And I mean it. He literally made the joke that's only on a Monday, and literally when you ride down to SEC Media Days with this man in a car and it's just you two and you do this for a couple of years, you learn a lot about each other. And so that's literally a day in the life of Jimmy Hyams. So I appreciate him joining the show. That's going to do it here for today's show. And a big thank you to all of our guests here today and Jimmy, who we just wrapped up with. Thank you guys so much for staying patient with me as I'm out of town, out of the country here this week. I hope 3 episodes were good enough. I know we missed on Tuesday and Thursday, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But we will be back on Monday, 5 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, breaking down everything Tennessee football, Tennessee basketball, Tennessee recruiting, all that good stuff, and more right here on Locked On Vols. It's your first listen every single day, and I can't thank you enough for making it what it is. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you haven't already. I'm Eric Kane. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll do it again on Monday right here on Locked On Vols.